Captain Ernest Emery Harmon was a tall man, both in stature and in life. Naturally, it follows that his friends nicknamed him Tiny. He perished while attempting to save his airship, a Douglas O-25C observation plane, on a flight from Easton, Maryland to Mitchell Field, Long Island, New York, on August 27, 1933. The following is a eulogy written by one of his old military pals. Tiny old friend, I wish that you knew how all the boys at the field miss you. Your booming voice and your happy smile, your glad hello to both rank and file. Your outstretched hand, an encouraging word, and an optimism undeterred. But the one thing we'll ne'er replace is that boyish grin upon your face. And I'll wager, if only us mortals could see, that you're leading the flight in eternity. William Joseph Collins, Schenectady, New York. In a submission to the Air Corps newsletter 5 years after Captain Harmon's death, Mr. Collins commented further that, quote, rough and ready Tiny's friends in other branches of the service and in military life were legion, end quote. Not only was Captain Harmon an aviation pioneer, he was also a gifted athlete. On athletic scholarship at Bethany College in West Virginia, he played football, basketball, and baseball. After his schooling and during his military career, he coached, officiated, and played many sports, including driving and motorsports competition. He even became a referee for the National Professional Football League during the mid-1920s. He was also an accomplished golfer, having won many tournaments during his military career. He is on record as having hit a par 72 in a tournament at the Gatton Golf Club at France Field in the Panama Canal Zone. He graduated from Bethany College in 1914 and was appointed principal of the Tyler County High School in West Virginia, where he taught mathematics and physics and coached sports. It was at Bethany College that Captain Harmon met Harriet Ferris Alexander. She was born in 1895 and died in 1969. They were married at the First Presbyterian Church in Washington, Pennsylvania on Friday, July 23, 1915. These leisurely photos were taken of them on a bridge or possibly a railroad trestle, most likely near her childhood home in Wheeling, West Virginia. At one point, Harriet accompanied her husband on a military flight from Washington, D.C. to New York, and as a result, she became the first woman ever to fly from the nation's capital to New York City. They had 3 boys, William, Robert, and Ernie Jr., and they also had a daughter, Elizabeth, who died at the age of 2. This is the family home where Harriet raised her 3 boys and continued to live until her death in 1969. In 1928, then Lieutenant Harmon was stationed in the Panama Canal Zone. Seen here are William and Ernie Jr., and then all 3 boys with the Panama Canal in the background. This shot shows an interesting contrast between modes of transportation, horseback or airplane. And this is Harriet with William and Ernie Jr. Captain Harmon and Harriet, with most likely his mother Sybil Emery Harmon. And this is Captain Harmon with Harriet, and most likely her sister Mary Alexander, who later became Mary Alexander Gregory. And this is Captain Harmon with Harriet relaxing at a horse racing venue, most likely Belmont Park, Long Island, near Mitchell Field. This is the beginning of a vacation by train to the Grand Canyon. This is a nice shot of Captain Harmon with Harriet and a friend on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. And this is them relaxing at a nearby venue after touring the Grand Canyon. This is the Harmon family clan enjoying the ocean at Jones Beach, Long Island. Seen in the white bathing suit with the black straps is Harriet, Captain Harmon's wife. And in the black bathing suit there next to her is Captain Harmon's mother, Sybil Emery Harmon. She was born in 1869 and died in 1936. The white-haired gentleman in the black jacket is Captain Harmon's father, Henry Franklin Harmon. He was born in 1866 and died in 1940. This is Captain Harmon's father playing with two of his grandsons, Robert Harmon and David Hill. That's Harriet speaking with her mother-in-law, and they're joined by Captain Harmon's brother, Frank. Frank is married to Helen O'Shaughnessy Harmon. She can be seen in the white bathing suit there with the white cap. That's a nice shot of Captain Harmon with his mother. And Captain Harmon's sister, also named Helen, is seen in the black and white bathing suit with the black and white cap. That's Helen, Captain Harmon's sister, playing with Captain Harmon's son, William Alexander Harmon. And that's her playing with another of her nephews, Robert Harmon. Personality being displayed by Frank's wife, and that's Captain Harmon's mother and Harriet and Captain Harmon's father. Following Captain Harmon's enlistment on September 25, 1917, in the aviation section of the Signal Enlisted Reserve Corps of the United States Army, he attended ground school at the School of Military Aeronautics in Austin, Texas, followed by flying lessons at Kelly Field in San Antonio, Texas, and flight school at Gerstner Field in Lake Charles, Louisiana, where he earned his wings. He received his RMA rating and was commissioned second lieutenant on May 4, 1918. He remained at Gerstner Field as a flight instructor and as an instructor of aerial gunnery. In August 1918, he was transferred to Wilbur Wright Field in Fairfield, Ohio, where he studied aircraft armament. He also spent time stationed at McCook Field in Dayton, Ohio as a test pilot for the Air Corps Engineering Division. Later, he worked at the United States Patent Office in Washington, D.C., becoming a Patent Office test pilot and a recognized expert in parachute technology and in the field of aeronautical engineering. Early in 1919, Lieutenant Harmon smashed the airspeed record between Washington and New York in a two-seater Lepaire airplane similar to the one pictured here. His passenger, Colonel Rutherford Hartz, said Harmon, quote, burnt the air, end quote, having made the trip in 85 minutes at an average speed of 165.1 miles per hour. In his own words, the Wizard of the Air, as Harmon was often called, describes his love of flying. Quote, there is nothing like it. It is much easier than driving a motor car. Nothing in your path but a few birds and no check on your speed. You know, down on Earth there are so many speed traps and a motorist must check up, even though he has a high-powered machine and could sprint a bit. But the only regret I have is the fact that I was kept from getting overseas and into action. I would have liked to have had a chance at the Kaiser's Airmen. They would have had to hustle to get away if I was driving a Lepaire, end quote. One of Captain Harmon's greatest achievements came when he was only 26 years old. He piloted the first ever large aircraft around the perimeter of the continental United States in 1919, less than 16 years after the Wright brothers' first flight ever, and 8 years before Charles Lindbergh's famous Atlantic Ocean crossing. The round-the-rim flight was approved by Brigadier General Billy Mitchell to accomplish several objectives. It was to prove the durability and reliability of the Martin bomber and its Packard Liberty motors, which was the first ever heavy bomber built totally in the United States. It was also intended to demonstrate the viability of commercial air travel, to generate enthusiasm of potential young recruits into the recently established Army Air Corps, and to inspire local communities across America to build more landing fields and airports. The round-the-rim flight was monitored by the entire nation, and it was featured in newspapers across the country. During the mission, the crew met with many local politicians, military aviators, movie stars, and fans, including children, many of whom had never seen an airplane up close before. Often with no landing field in sight, Captain Harmon and the crew would land in open fields, and they were greeted by admiring and helpful citizens who would volunteer food and lodging during their stay. It was considered an honor to be the person chosen to turn the props by hand to start the giant Liberty motors and send the crew on their way. The pioneering flight resulted in some of the first recommendations regarding airfield design, landing strip markings, aviation mapping standards, and basic aviation communications. Nine years after his death, Harmon Field in Stephenville, Newfoundland, Canada, was commissioned in honor of Captain Harmon by an act of Congress on June 23, 1941. Seen here is the arrival of various dignitaries, including the Harmon family, for the dedication ceremony of Harmon Air Force Base on August 13, 1949. That's Harriet in the blue hat. Next to her is William, her oldest son. Next to William is Elaine Harmon, Captain Harmon's daughter-in-law. And next to her was Ernie and his wife, Elsie. That's Harriet on the reviewing stand before the parade begins. This is after the parade. That's Elaine Harmon, Robert's wife, in the white dress. And that's Robert Harmon. Next you'll see Elsie and then Ernie Jr. Elsie is Ernie's wife. There's Elaine Harmon again, and next to her is William, Captain Harmon's oldest son. William flew B-24s over Italy during World War II and went on to pursue a career in the Air Force. Robert, due to health reasons, could not join the military, so he supported the war effort as a civilian contractor, performing aircraft repair while stationed on Biak Island in Indonesia. After the war, he became a patent attorney. And Ernie Jr. joined the medical corps during the war and became a physician after the war ended. Seen here are individuals, civilians and military, queuing up to enter Ernest Harmon Theater on the day of the dedication ceremonies. And that's Harriet on stage inside Ernest Harmon Theater. Through the years, there were many visitors to Harmon Air Force Base, including Queen Elizabeth. Entertainers who performed at Harmon included Bob Hope, Marilyn Monroe, Frank Sinatra, and Elvis. In his role as an Air Service test pilot in 1924, Harmon flew the massive Barling bomber, pictured here, which was the largest airplane in the world at the time. This airship was the Army's answer to the Navy's ZR-1, which was the first American-built dirigible. Lieutenant Harmon flew the Barling bomber, crash landing at Roosevelt Field, which was conveniently located very close to Mitchell Field, Long Island, where he had taken off. He was paid $1,000 for making this highly dangerous flight, after which he commented, quote, "Not a bad day's pay for just crossing the street," end quote. In his expert opinion, he deemed the bomber as, quote, "not yet airworthy," end quote. Ultimately, in 1928, General Hap Arnold ordered the plane, which had sat in disrepair for several years, destroyed so that no public outcry would ever be made over the $1 million waste of taxpayers' money. On February 19, 1919, piloting a Lepaire biplane like the one seen here, Harmon set a new speed record traveling between Long Island, New York, and Bowling Field in Washington, D.C., covering the distance in 85 minutes. During the international air races at Mitchell Field, Long Island in 1925, piloting a huff-daland light bomber like the one seen here, Harmon won the Detroit News Trophy race, achieving an average speed of 119.91 miles per hour. And he won the medals seen here and worn by him in his formal portrait during the aerial gunnery and bombing matches at Langley Field, Virginia in 1926. Also piloting a huff-daland light bomber, Harmon, along with his bombardier, Lieutenant Harold George, won the bombing event in the heavier-than-air bomber category, scoring 1,472 out of a possible 1,600 points. In yet another risky assignment in his role as a test pilot, Harmon was the first pilot ever to fly the giant LWF Owl bomber with its three 400-horsepower Liberty motors, seen here. A few weeks before the historic Round the Rim mission began, on June 30th, 1919, Lieutenant Harmon flew the Martin MB-1 bomber from the Martin factory in Dayton, Ohio, to Bowling Field in Washington, D.C. Harmon successfully completed the 390-mile distance in 3 hours and 45 minutes, yet another speed record for him at the time. The original round-the-rim flight crew, seen in this photo, included a fifth member, a second pilot named Lotha A. Smith, who appears second from the left in the picture. Only 3 days into the nearly 4-month-long mission, he sprained his ankle during a hard landing at Jay, New York, near Lake Placid, and was forced to abandon completing the mission with the rest of the crew. As a result, Captain Harmon was required to pull double piloting duty in order to assure the successful completion of the mission. The Martin bomber model MB-1 was the first bomber that was completely manufactured in the United States. It was designed to replace the British Handley-Page O/400 and Italian Caproni bombers. The Glenn Martin Company celebrated the success of the round-the-rim flight, which was enabled both by the durability of their airplane product and by the skill, fortitude, and heroism of its crew, in advertisements including the one seen here. The result was the awarding of more military aviation contracts to the then fledgling Glenn Martin Company. Many fans, like the one seen here, asked to have their picture taken with the famous airplane and members of her crew. This photo shows a group of fans who came to see the Martin airplane and its crew while at Chaplin Field, Los Angeles. While not verified, the individual on the far right has a striking resemblance to the comedian W.C. Fields, and to his left is possibly his girlfriend at the time, Nora Bayes. The original Martin MB-1 airplane that enabled the success of the round-the-rim flight was eventually returned to McCook Field, where it was retrofitted to accommodate a dozen passengers. But the concept failed, and the ultimate fate of the plane is unknown. Adversities that occurred during the round-the-rim flight included flying in an open cockpit during weather that was often extremely harsh. During rain and ice storms, Harmon was known to remove his goggles on occasion to keep them from freezing to his face, even though this impaired his ability to see due to the blinding rain and wind. And during flight, he was quote-unquote attached to a relief tube for use when necessary. The round-the-rim flight mechanics, Harding and Tobias, were required to provide maintenance to the fuselage and motors after every landing. They even were known to perform emergency maintenance while in flight, which required wing walking to get to the motors in order to stop fluid leaks. It should also be noted that all the round-the-rim crew members were not equipped with parachutes. Seen here are the first 4 pages of the 27-page round-the-rim flight log filed by Colonel Rutherford Hartz a few days after the mission was completed. The original copy of this historic document is located in the United States National Archives in Washington, D.C. And seen here is an armed version of the Martin bomber, which was equipped with 5 7.62 caliber machine guns. And this is one of Captain Harmon's favorite photos from his personal collection, in which he displays his feelings for one of the Kaiser's airplanes. Yet another of his pioneering achievements occurred while Harmon was stationed in Panama in the late 1920s. He led the first ever flight of American bombers from within the borders of the United States to an international destination, in this case, the Panama Canal Zone. Prior to this, bombers were typically shipped by boat to their international destination due to their limited flying range at the time. Although World War I inspired Harmon to enlist in the military, to his regret, he was never sent into action on the front lines in Europe. Instead, due to his uncommon flying, gunnery, bombing, and heroic test piloting skills, he was kept stateside to provide expert training in those disciplines. One of his students, Captain Chamberlain, is on record as having shot down 5 German aircraft in one day during World War I. An annotation to a copy of his biography taken from Who's Who in American Aeronautics states that the Army lost some of its potentially great leaders during the 1920s and 1930s. Captain Harmon was one of them. Harmon Drive at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas is named in his honor.